Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, President Biden has renominated Jay Powell as chairman of the Federal Reserve. Household spending has increased. That should be a strong spending season for Christmas. And President Biden releases 50 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. But is that just a drop in the bucket? We'll have that and more tonight on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up, and I hope your week went well. I'm Andre Laborde. Our goal is bringing Wall Street to your street for today, for Friday, November the 26th, 2021, and to get you ready for the week ahead. Well, I hope everyone had a safe and happy Thanksgiving yesterday, and if you're one of those that hit the road this Thanksgiving weekend, well, your numbers actually went down, maybe because of gas prices, but approximately 32% of Americans were expected to travel this past Wednesday through Sunday. Well, the nation's airports, they're certainly busy this weekend from this past Wednesday to this coming Sunday, because the travel industry reports that 8 to 10 million people are expected to travel this weekend and go through TSA screenings, according to AAA. Expenses for the airlines rose with jet fuel because that's increased 70% since last year, 2020. And by the way, the heaviest travel day will be this Sunday. And consumer spending, strong despite higher prices. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Wednesday, this past week, released the report that last month in October and said consumer spending rose 1.3%, and personal income also rose 0.5%. But the bad news, core inflation year over year is now up 4.1%. Now tonight, we're going to be talking with Wall Street Journal reporter Greg Zuckerman. Greg took some time off from the Wall Street Journal and wrote a book on how two companies beat out the rest to develop the vaccine to fight COVID-19. His new book is out, and it's called A Shot to Save the World. COVID has been part of our lives now since March of 2020, when the economy came to a halt, all because of the virus. And Greg will be here in just a minute. But so how did the markets do this week? Well, because of the holiday, this week was abbreviated, and as of the stock market close on Wednesday, November the 24th, the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended on Wednesday up 0.5 points. And the S&P 500 closed Wednesday up almost 0.1 point for the week. And finally, the NASDAQ, they finished on Wednesday as it closed down 1.3%. As of Wednesday. Wells Fargo has rated Microsoft as a buy with a new price target at $400 a share. And RBC has put Chevron Oil as a buy with a new price target at a new price of $140 a share. Well, our guest this evening is Greg Zuckerman. He's an investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal who took some time off but still used his investigative abilities to write about two companies, Moderna and Pfizer, for a vaccine from COVID-19, and he's here with us tonight. Hi, Greg. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Greg, really, as I mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed the book, and a lot of things that I just did not know about. Like one of the things that the vaccine has been out probably less than 12 months now. When did you start researching this book? Because the vaccine hasn't been out that long.
Yeah, so early on in the process, we're talking sort of spring of 2020, I kind of made a bet that these vaccines would work. And I started learning about them, the different approaches, and going back into history and learning about the fascinating researchers, unlikely kind of personalities, quirky, odd, who are responsible for these approaches and all the drama going back in history. So for a while, I just went back in history and learned about the history in the hope that these vaccines would work. And I tracked along the way these companies and these researchers and went behind the scenes. So that was my approach. If the vaccines weren't effective, then I would have wasted some time, but at least I learned some science along the way.
Well, talk about a wild bet. I mean, because you had if I understand, you had all these other companies, vaccine companies, and you had 10 or 12 of them, and then it wound up to be, in this case, Moderna, and also Pfizer, because I don't think Johnson & Johnson had come out yet, but then it narrowed it down to those two. When did you find that out?
So early on, there were indications that the Moderna vaccine would work and that the mRNA approach in general would work, which is behind the BioNTech/Pfizer vaccine too. But we're talking indications in animals, different types of animals. There were good reasons to think it was going to be not have too many side effects, but we didn't know for sure until, like everybody else, even the people internally didn't know for sure until November of 2020. And there was so much drama that I wasn't even aware of. And I write about behind the scenes at Moderna, at Pfizer, at the other companies I write about too. I write about J&J, I write about Oxford and AstraZeneca, a company called Novavax, which is going to be coming out. They all had so much drama behind the scenes because they themselves weren't sure. They weren't certain. They thought they'd be 50 plus 60% effectiveness, but it turns out it was 90%. So just in the days, in the moments leading up to the results, there was all kinds of crazy drama behind the scenes.
Moderna, the CEO, unlike some types of, I would assume, pharmaceutical companies that want to hedge their bets, so their R&D department would be working on a number of different types of vaccines or cures. They put basically almost 100% all into just this vaccine. And Moderna, I mean, people know of Moderna now because of the press and because of the vaccine. But at the time, 12 months ago, Moderna was a very small market cap company.
Yeah, no one really recalls, likes to recall, but not only were they small, there were suspicions about them for years, accusations even, and they were exaggerating their capabilities. The CEO is a very controversial character, Stéphane Bancel. He's not a scientist. He's a really smooth salesman. He wears black turtlenecks. He reminded people of Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of Theranos. There were accusations that Moderna was also exaggerating its capabilities and its research. They were unfounded, they were unfair even, but people had a lot of suspicions. So as you say, going into 2020, they're almost the last company to have, anyone would have expected to step up and save us. I mean, you would have thought it'd be Merck or Sanofi, one of these vaccine giants, and it wasn't. It was a company like Moderna that really hadn't made any vaccines or drugs effective or protective or approved ever in its history. So it's an unlikely story, which is kind of what got me excited about this book, frankly. It's a group of unlikely heroes, not just at Moderna, but elsewhere.
Yeah. You know, people that are old enough to remember the O.J. Simpson trial, they remember Barry Scheck and their talk about DNA. But with this particular type of drug, because it's through the body, through the use of RNA, mRNA, for the transmission of bringing it through. This is RNA. What is the difference between RNA and DNA?
Sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about the background. mRNA, messenger RNA, is a molecule. We have it inside of us. It transports messages from DNA. DNA doesn't move anywhere, so it needs help to get the message into the part of the cell where proteins are created that keep us alive. So messenger RNA, we've always known about this. And we always kind of said, well, just like it delivers messages within the body, within the cell, maybe we could create mRNA molecules in the lab and send instructions into the body to create any kind of protein we would want, meaning we could create any kind of drug or vaccine that we want. That was always been the goal. That's the holy grail among scientists. And then just as quickly as they got excited about it, they usually would dismiss the idea because mRNA gets chopped up so quickly by the body's enzymes. It's a very unstable molecule. It doesn't last very long. So people said, don't waste your time with mRNA. And my book is about the researchers, the scientists who ignored the warnings, ignored the conventional wisdom. They said, yeah, we know mRNA has its challenge, but we are going to figure out a way around it. And that's what the story is about. And it's ironic, almost sad, because a lot of the anti-vaxxers say, oh, I don't want to take an mRNA vaccine because it's going to change my DNA. It's going to last on my body. No, it doesn't. That's the whole beauty of mRNA. It gets chopped up so quickly, no one ever wanted to work with it for years. But these scientists proved you can.
Not only did they have to concentrate on the mRNA, which most people thought was not right, but they also had to isolate which tract of those protein amino acids. Is that correct?
Well, so mRNA is based on, again, it's just a molecule. You can create it by using just the chemical basis for it, the sequence, the genetic sequence behind it. So all you really need is that genetic sequence. And that's what happened in early 2020. This new virus emerged. And the scientists quickly, and I write about the drama, how they did it really quickly. They said, well, here's the sequence. Let's go make a vaccine. Let's go make an mRNA. Let's go make a molecule, this mRNA molecule. And what are they trying to create? Well, in this case, they're trying to create the spike protein. You don't have to create the whole virus. You don't have to take a piece of the virus like old school kind of traditional vaccines. All we want to do is send a message into the body to create a protein. And again, in this case, it's the spike protein. And why do we do that? It's because vaccines are an education. We're teaching the immune system. So we teach it one way, one time. We say, hey, here's this spike protein, create it, destroy it, be on the wares for it in the future, because if you ever experience it, encounter it, then go after it. We want the immune system to tackle it. So that's the beauty of mRNA. All you need is the genetic sequence of a virus. You take a piece of that sequence, you don't even need the whole thing, just a piece for some characteristic like a protein of that virus, send it into the body through these vaccines, create the protein, and then it teaches the body, the immune system, to fight it off when it's encountered for real.
Does the vaccine that is being used right now, will this have to be a new type of vaccine to fight this new type of variant?
So for now, these vaccines are very protective. We're getting boosters, which adds to our ability to fight off the virus if it's encountered. At some point, if the virus keeps changing, and that's what viruses do, their new strains, et cetera, new variants, then theoretically we could adjust these vaccines. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Let's say you go, and I think the future is you go into your doctor's office every year or so and you get a COVID vaccine, but it becomes an all-in-one with flu, and maybe they throw something else in there too. And yes, as you say, if there's a new variant, if it's adjusting the new strain, then they can adjust the vaccine accordingly.
Do you think COVID will be with us now for either quite some time or for the rest of our lives? We just have to now continuously keep getting boosters?
Well, I'll give you the bad news and the good news. The bad news is, yeah, I think this virus is going to be with us forever. There are too many people that are unvaccinated. The viruses, as I just said, they morph, they change, they're new strains, variants. So we're going to always have to worry about it. But we already have about, I think it's 4 coronaviruses in our society that we deal with, and they create the common cold. And this will be the 5th, and we'll get colds once in a while, and maybe eventually we all actually get this virus, unfortunately, but we'll be protected thanks to these vaccines, thanks to drugs that are coming. We'll be protected from hospitalization, from severe sickness. It'll just become a nuisance in some ways.
Greg, when you were doing your book, there's the 2 type of immunities that I had heard about at the very beginning. One was herd immunity, when so many people have gotten the disease, the virus of COVID. But the other type was natural immunity, so that those who either got it through asymptomatic or actually got the symptoms of COVID, that they would have a natural immunity from it. Does that natural immunity be just as effective, if not more so, than the vaccine of Moderna and Pfizer?
So yeah, for a while, there were skeptics about the vaccine and others who said, well, why don't we just rely on herd immunity, as you suggest? In this case, actually, it's high. You need about 85 probably, or even 90% of the people in society to have gotten the virus, and then you've got natural immunity to it. You create these antibodies just like you do with a vaccine. The vaccine teaches the immune system, so does the virus itself. Getting sick teaches the immune system to fight it off in the future. The problem is natural immunity doesn't last as long as the vaccine, so that wanes. Our understanding is within months, your natural immunity, for those who've become sick with COVID, that begins to wane, whereas the vaccine lasts longer. But the other concern is long COVID. I've talked to people who are still struggling, who are lethargic, they're foggy, their brain is foggy, and that's from getting the vaccine. So for those who say, well, let everybody just get sick, and then we'll have natural immunity, I would counter by saying no one wants to get sick because no one wants the possibility of getting long COVID.
I would imagine also that those that have other types of problems, such as obesity, renal problems, heart disease, those are more susceptible to have it becoming more fatal than
Yes,
those that are
yes,
healthy. Right?
yes.
Between a certain age.
Although whole healthy people, especially with the Delta variant, I've seen examples, number of vaccines, skinny, healthy people who've been in the hospital and get asthma, and it's just not something you want.
And I don't hear that much about it right now, but types of drugs that for people that just get COVID, and I'm thinking of Regeneron, or I think they call it monoclonal antibodies that Regeneron, and I know that I haven't heard for a while, but hydroxychloroquine that was originally thought of as being used to help people who had just gotten it. Through your research, was there any truth to that?
Some of those drugs are effective. Hydroxychloroquine, not. But the Regeneron monoclonal antibody, and there are a couple more coming. One from Pfizer, protease inhibitor, which was developed actually to fight off AIDS. The only problem is they're not as effective generally as the vaccines, and they're much more expensive for society than the vaccines. And frankly, you have to get COVID first to get any of those, the pills that's coming or the existing drugs. And you don't want to get COVID because, again, it's not a high percentage of people, but a percentage of the populace who gets COVID gets long COVID. And that's kind of hobbles them for long periods, over a year. There's a character in my book who's still dealing with it, and he got it in March 2020, and it's not something you want to get.
Glad you brought up about the pill form. I think UK regulators have already approved the pill form. Do you think that once the pill form has been approved here in the United States, that those that maybe for whatever reason they're not feeling right to take the actual shot, do you think by pill form that would increase the percentages of U.S. citizens in getting the vaccine?
Well, I hope it doesn't discourage people from getting the vaccine. It might. Somebody might say, hey, I'm just going to wait till I get sick and then take one of these pills. And the pills are very effective, and it might help them. But again, there's the danger of getting sick and having long COVID, pill or no pill. And also, frankly, you have to wait until you get tested to get these pills. You're not going to be able to just roll into your CVS and just get one off the shelf. You're going to have to need proof that you've got COVID, at least initially. And testing is still not where we want in terms of effectiveness and availability in this country. So people still need to get these vaccines.
Oh, so the actual pill that we're hearing about, it's not instead of the injection.
Exactly, yes. They're not just doing this instead of vaccines. And the only way to end this pandemic and to ensure there aren't new strains is for people to get vaccinated. But they're going to be hesitant people. And frankly, one of the reasons I wrote this book is that people who are wary of how quickly they develop this vaccine, and I get why they're concerned. In 330 days from the sequence of the virus until the authorization, that's a record. Nothing's ever been close. Historically, the fastest vaccine ever was 4 years, and the average was 10 years. So here we did it in under a year. So I understand why some people are hesitant, but part of the reason I wrote my book is to show that, yes, we turned this thing around really quickly in 2020, but all the research took years, took decades, and it should be reassuring for people that these are serious-minded researchers. They overcame all kinds of obstacles. They're not political in any way. They're just wanting to save the world and change mankind and help mankind. So in some ways, I think you come away from my book reassured about the process. It wasn't rushed in any way.
If you're just joining us, we're really happy to have Wall Street Journal reporter Greg Zuckerman. Greg has written a great book called A Shot to Save the World. We're going to take a break right now, but we'll be right back. More with Greg Zuckerman. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Wall Street Journal reporter Greg Zuckerman. Greg has written a great book. It's called A Shot to Save the World, on how one scrappy company, especially Moderna, and they beat out from a number of other pharmaceutical companies to get the vaccine to fight COVID-19 and also now needing with the boosters and talking with Greg. Greg, in your book, you were talking about, and you kind of, I think, alluded to this right before we went into the break, that this was more of like a Manhattan Project. Well, people that knew of World War II history, the Manhattan Project was huge. But what did you mean when you called it like a Manhattan Project?
I think it's the greatest scientific accomplishment that we've seen in decades, if not longer. It's also the greatest accomplishment of modern finance. Financial companies, investors, venture capitalists, individual investors stepped up for these companies over and over again. And I wrote about it in the book, both Moderna, but the other companies I write about too, BioNTech, Novavax. They helped these vaccine makers when they were down and out for the count. So it is like a Manhattan Project in that serious-minded scientists focused with a lot of money behind them, support focused on saving mankind. In Manhattan Project in a different kind of a way, but you could argue that. I don't want to get to that here, but in this case, I don't think we appreciate how remarkable these vaccines are. I think with time we will, but I do think it's mankind's, at least modern science's, greatest achievement.
Do you think, because as we mentioned earlier, the vaccine has been out less than 12 months now, and no, we're in November right now.
2 years.
So
2 years.
For doing that. And during the last administration, a lot of the red tape that normally goes, as you were mentioning, that it takes for a vaccine to go from the R&D development stage to the trial area to being approved by the FDA. A lot of the red tape was cut in half, or even more so. Do you think this will now be a start for for other types of vaccines that will be reduced in time to go from the R&D period to finally getting it to the public?
It's possible. What is important to appreciate here is that they didn't cut any corners. What they did was, because of all the money that Operation Warp Speed gave the companies, but also the money that frankly came from Wall Street and other kinds of places, they did things simultaneously, which has never been done before. They developed the vaccine, they tested it, and they manufactured it all at the same time, which is unheard of. Why would you spend billions of dollars manufacturing something when you don't even know it's going to be approved or even authorized by the government and that it even works? But that's what they were doing. And that's something you can do in a crisis. So hopefully we don't have any more of these crises that force us to do all these kinds of things simultaneously and writing these big checks. But if we need to, we have a model for how it worked.
Last week in the Wall Street Journal, there was an op-ed, and it was basically where there are some senators that are and government elected officials that want to say that because of the fact that the NIH, the government, helped Moderna and such in getting this to market, that they should also have the ability to, which could, in essence, say, get pricing powers over how much the drug cost, to where it could be sent to and such, and reduce the role of what Moderna had done. Well, you've done so much research on Moderna. What are your thoughts on what some government officials want to do now of reducing Moderna's role and increasing the federal government's role in this?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. The federal government, the scientists there, played a very important role in development of the Moderna vaccine. I would argue, according to my reporting, Moderna played the biggest role and doesn't get enough credit. But I'm not a patent lawyer, so one can argue, my understanding is, under patent law, if you played any role, you get potentially, I'm not weighing in here, but you potentially have rights to be part of the patent. So the government will argue that. And the Moderna people will say, well, yeah, they were helpful, but we mostly did this thing, so why should we have to share the intellectual property? It's a fascinating question. And I think there's also a little bit of resentment about Moderna because they are making billions and billions of dollars during the pandemic. But it's also important to remember that for years they made nothing, and investors plowed billions of dollars into this company, venture capitalists, but individual investors too, on the hopes of a payoff down the road, 5, 10 years, maybe even longer down the road. So they, to some extent, have been patient and maybe are deserving and reaping some of the profits here.
And on how Moderna took the opposite track of the mRNA. I'm reminded of the story, and you even were bringing it up in your book on how Jonas Salk, when he was trying to develop the polio vaccine, Dr., and I want to say his first name was Albert Sabin, was saying, no, you had to study live cultures to going in, and Salk went the other way of having the dead cultures, which Jonas Salk's vaccine turned out to be correct.
Very competitive, neurotic even, but they're very ambitious and they're out for glory and to save us all. So I find the people, the individuals, just as interesting as the approaches. They kind of surprised me with how much personality they really have.
Well, Greg, I've always enjoyed your work in the Wall Street Journal. I've enjoyed your previous book. I really enjoyed this one. It's called A Shot to Save the World by Greg Zuckerman. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we would love to hear from you. You can always write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. Keep it pithy or concise. We'll be glad to answer your questions. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, what state leads the country in the production of turkeys? We'll have that answer in just a moment. Well, what state leads the country in the production of turkeys? Minnesota, leading the country with over 49 million turkeys, followed by North Carolina. Well, we've got some great guests coming up in the weeks ahead. Coming up, we'll be talking with Mario Gabelli. Now, Mario is the founder, the chairman, and the CEO of Gabelli Asset Management, and they've got over $40 billion of assets under management. 2021 is now coming to an end. Well, how does he see 2022 shaping up, and where is he putting his money to invest so we'll know where to put our money? Mario Gabelli will be coming up. And also coming up in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking with the former NATO commander of all Afghanistan forces, General David Petraeus. General Petraeus was also the former director of the CIA. Russian troops are now at the Ukrainian border, and the Chinese are using mock-ups of U.S. aircraft carriers for military training. Lots to discuss with General David Petraeus. Well, this week, President Biden has reappointed Jay Powell to stay as chairman of the Federal Reserve. The progressives wanted Lael Brainerd rather than Powell, but he decided to keep Powell as chairman but give Brainerd the vice chair position. Well, this is a great lead-in to our guest for next week. We're going to be talking with former vice chairman of the FDIC, Thomas Hoenig. Professor Hoenig was president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and he was a sitting member of the FOMC. He was at the table deciding what interest rates this country should be paying and so much more. It's going to be an interesting conversation on inflation, interest rates, and the exorbitant debt that's accumulating that is now many people believe that we're drowning in. Tom Hoenig will be here with us next week. And as a reminder, we do repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for Friday, November the 26th, 2021. Hope you've enjoyed it. Happy Thanksgiving weekend to all. Enjoy the leftovers. Thank you for Greg Zuckerman for joining us this evening. But as always, we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on all the social media, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and WYES.org. So have a fun weekend ahead and a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.